All right, so let's take a look at this now interview. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, and this year's theme is Think Equal, Build Smart, and Innovate for Change. Joining us in our Pretoria studio, we've got Anne Githuku-Shongwe. She's the head of the UN Women Multi-Country Office, which is based here in South Africa. She, of course, is in our Pretoria studios. What a pleasure to have you in studio with us, and thank you so much for your time.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you. Good morning, Leanne.
Talk to us about the significance of International Women's Day. And I know that we have our Women's Day here in South Africa, which we all know we celebrate and commemorate in August. However, International Women's Day is tomorrow. Talk to us about how this applies to South African women.
Well, you know, Leanne, whether in South Africa or anywhere in the world, at the current pace that we're moving in terms of gender equality, it will take us 217 years for your son and daughter, your husband and you, to have equal access to opportunity. So this year's theme is really for us to leapfrog from where we are, this 217 years behind men, to be able to try to find ways to build equality between men and women. Mm-hmm. So International Women's Day was initiated in 1911, 118 years ago. Women in Europe were talking about the right to vote, the right to work. And so that long ago, this conversation was on the table. Yeah. But it was only in 1975 that the United Nations declared this as a global day to be recognized. As you can imagine, South Africa is one country that has a National Women's Day, but most countries around the world don't, and don't recognize any day really for women. So this day serves as that day for women across the world.
Amazing, isn't it?
And so we use this day to really track progress. Where are we, and what you know, how are we doing in this regard?
So I suppose, you know, as much as we may be a little cynical about sort of ourselves as women in South Africa, we should be very, very grateful that, in fact, women are taken more seriously in terms of at least celebrating them at one point. However, we know we're near there. In fact, I'm looking at the theme of your interview, and it just made me remember the interview that my colleague Sakina has just conducted. The theme is Think Equal, Build Smart, and Innovate for Change. However, we've just done an interview focusing in on the fact that only 14% of boardroom positions in Africa are occupied by women. I mean, think equal with numbers like that? It's a bit difficult.
Well, we've got to push it. And this is what we do at the United Nations, is to make sure that we hold those global standards. And so we're calling on countries, whether it's elections. In this season, we have 6 elections that are in Southern Africa that we have to pay attention to. And we know that outside of countries like South Africa and Namibia, whose political parties have 50-50 agreements, that in general we will not achieve that equality in terms of political participation. The same goes for boards and in business and in schools in terms of science. And so unless we actually push and demand equal rights and equal thinking, it's not going to happen. And so a lot of what we've been doing is, in terms of the private sector, we have a program that we call the Women's Empowerment Principles. And many companies are signatories to this. And it calls on companies to actually push for 50% leadership in their companies, because we have data that shows us that where there's equality in boards, where there's equality in senior leadership of companies, the bottom line and revenues are actually increased by over 30%. Tomorrow we're going to actually ring the bell for gender equality at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. This is going to be done across the world. South Africa is one of the few countries in the world that actually has a gender policy in the stock exchange. And so, yes, we are far, far behind where we want to be. But certainly, South Africa is a country that can celebrate some advances in some areas, especially in terms of political representation. But there are other areas where we're lagging seriously, and we need to talk about that and how technology and innovation can leapfrog us so that we can start breaking some of those and disrupting some of those areas.
Yeah, it certainly is. And one of the big things that we often speak to is the fact that, you know, we as women tend to lock ourselves behind doors and close doors and talk about these problems with ourselves, amongst ourselves, and then expect change to happen. Whereas including men in these discussions and including men to help in these situations is perhaps one of the answers that we're not looking at. How does UN Women include men in this train of thought and in these changes?
Well, one of the things that we do is that we have a global initiative that we call He for She. And the He for She initiative is an initiative that was launched by our former deputy president, who is currently the executive director of UN Women, and precisely to push for equals. In fact, we have an initiative called Equals. And what we do as part of this He for She initiative is call for companies across the world, large companies, multinational companies, big national banks, to actually take decisions to drive gender equality in their companies. In South Africa, Standard Bank, at the level of the CEO of Standard Bank Africa, Sim Shabalala, signed an agreement to ensure that they will push for gender equality within Standard Bank. So we're watching them, and we are able to actually assess what their baseline is and be able to review on an annual basis how they're doing in terms of leadership, in terms of buying from women, in terms of the kind of training and investment they have in women-owned businesses. De Beers is another partner that we have, and we're working with them not only internally in De Beers itself, but also looking at how to ensure that they invest in women in the economic environment where the mines are held. So this is an initiative that we're pushing across, and we're beginning to see CEOs of companies beginning to sit up and pay attention and start asking, you know, what does this really mean for my business? And we've seen them make commitments, and we're seeing this at heads of state level. And let me just give you one quick example. The president of Iceland is a He for She partner and He for She champion in Iceland, and he actually declared unequal pay for work of equal value, a criminal offense.
Amazing.
And so companies, yes.
That's
and
amazing.
so companies that dare to have unequal pay, as they do across the world, paying women 75% to every dollar that a woman earns, a man earns, is actually now can be taken to court and tried for criminal offense.
That's incredible.
How we need to work on this.
That is incredible.
Yes.
I'm absolutely impressed by that. In fact, I have just Googled him, and it's President Johannesson. He's my new hero of the day, and I tip my hat to him because that is what we need to hear, real innovation and that start of thinking equal, building smart. Thank you, Anne. I want to talk to you all day, but I can't. Anne Githuku-Shongwe is the head of the UN Women Multi-Country Office based here in South Africa and chatting to us about International Women's Day. It's happening tomorrow. The theme again, think equal, build smart, and innovate for change. Thanks again, Anne. Let's take a break. We'll see you after this.